Dr. Oz Show today at 4 on News Channel 5.
Today on Katie. Locked up. Lives ruined until the truth set them free.
I wanted to scream out. I wanted to shout. I did not do this.
A father accused of rape by his own daughter.
How were you able to fabricate such a convincing story against your dad?
Sitting in there knowing that she lied about me.
Her elaborate lie that put him in prison for 9 years.
I can't take it back.
Not quite as ready to talk about it as I thought I was.
Then, a mother with no criminal record accused of shaking a baby to death.
Your husband wanted you to confess to the crime.
I knew in my heart I could not do that.
Hi, everyone. It is hard to imagine the depths of despair and, frankly, hell that the man you're about to meet has been through. Thomas Kennedy found himself in the middle of a nightmare, an innocent man behind bars. He was a single dad living a humble life in Washington State, trying to rebuild a relationship with his daughters until one of them accused him of an unthinkable crime.
My name's Thomas Kennedy. I spent 9 years in prison for a crime I didn't commit. I was falsely accused of raping my own daughter. The ex-wife and I split up when my two daughters were young. My two daughters and I would spend time with each other every other weekend. The visits were generally fun. You know, kids will be kids. We did a lot of traveling when they would come to visit. We'd go camping, just do things. I worked in a scrapyard. Everything was going fine. I was having a good day up until I got that phone call. The officer had said that he wanted to talk to me because I'd been accused of molesting my daughter. My jaw hit the desk, literally. I mean, I was very confused. A daughter accusing a dad, it's horrible. Nobody believed that I did it. Nobody. I didn't run. I didn't hide. I didn't contest the system itself in any way, believing that my innocence would prevail. I guess I watched a lot of Matlock. Because it don't happen like that no more. The trial was horrible. I was scared. I think the worst moment in my life was when I watched my daughter walk across the courtroom and get up in that stand and point at me. I wanted to scream out. I wanted to shout. I wanted to stand up on the table and yell at the jury and say, I did not do this. My mind is just overwhelmed with why? They found me guilty, and that was the only evidence that they really had, was her pointing her finger at me.
Thomas Kennedy is here with us today. And Thomas, what was it like sitting in that courtroom, hearing your own daughter, your own flesh and blood, say these things about you?
Yeah, it was the worst moment of my life, Katie. I know it didn't happen. I'm innocent. And I love my daughter very much. And to hear this being spoken of me, it crushed me. It ruined me.
I guess the question is why? What would motivate her to make up these stories?
I was an alcoholic when I was younger, and 2 years before I went to prison, I'd quit drinking. But while I was drinking, I didn't pay much attention to my daughters, and Cassandra was screaming for attention. And I think what motivated her to do it was attention.
Did you sense that she was angry at you or resentful? I mean, did you sense there was something going on with her at the time?
No, actually I didn't. It was a blindside. I'd never thought anything like this would ever happen.
Is there a chance that anything happened, that you did anything untoward or inappropriate to your daughter and just have no recollection of it because of the alcohol?
Absolutely not. I wasn't. I wouldn't drink when they were around, when I would have them, and it wasn't very often while I was drinking.
What was prison life like for you?
It was horrible. It was knowing that I didn't do the crime, knowing that I was an innocent man in prison and being punished and being treated like I did it. It was horrible. It was scary. I never knew from one second to the next what was going to come at me.
So 9 years of this. Did you ever think that your daughter would recant, that she would come forward and tell the truth?
I had prayed for that my entire time that I was in prison, and it did happen. It did happen, and it was a big surprise when it happened, but I'd prayed for it and hoped for it every single day.
Because you were offered a plea bargain, weren't you?
Yes.
For a lesser charge, but you refused to take that.
I refused to take it. I was offered a plea bargain, and when I refused it, the charges were increased to a more severe charge, and that happened twice. And I still refused it. And no one, but at the second time it came around, my lawyer looked at me and he says, "You're going to prison for 15 to 20 years. You might want to take the plea." And I told my lawyer, I says, I'm not going to prison admitting that I did something I didn't do. It's not going to happen. We're going to trial, and prepare yourself because we're going to trial.
How did you feel about her? I mean, you must have been so upset and angry.
I was kind of angry at first, and I forgive my daughter. I absolutely forgive her. I was angry at first. I was hurt. Sitting in there knowing that she lied about me.
How did you deal with that?
I felt kind of angry at first. I'm sorry, I'm not...
That's okay.
Not quite as ready to talk about it as I thought I was. And then I felt, man, Thomas, you're drinking, man, you really messed your kids' life up. You should have been a better dad.
So you blamed yourself in a way?
Kinda, yeah.
When she finally did come forward, what did you feel in your heart?
I felt joy. I felt security, knowing that my prayer had finally been answered. And I had hope and faith all along that it would be answered. And it was, finally. You know, it's kind of how I felt.
Well, when we come back, we're going to talk about the shocking way Thomas's daughter, Cassandra, was able to fabricate this story of sexual assault. You'll hear from her when we come back.
Up next.
Tell me just what you're feeling right now.
Nervous, embarrassed, just regretful.
Cassandra faces her father.
9 years living with this secret. How were you able to endure the shame and the guilt?
That's next.
I was in awe that Cassandra came forth and told the truth. When I saw Cassandra on the stand testifying the truth, I cried. I was so proud of her for doing the right thing.
Cassandra Kennedy was just 11 years old when she concocted a story about a rape that never occurred. Her lies sent her father, Thomas Kennedy, to prison. He was sentenced to 15 years for 3 counts of child rape. 9 years later, Cassandra came forward to tell the truth and set him free. Cassandra is here with us today. Thank you for being here. I know this is incredibly emotional for you. Tell me just what you're feeling right now.
Just embarrassed, and just regretful.
Looking back on it, Cassandra, why do you think you did this?
I was just angry and upset because I felt like he wasn't around enough, and he, broken promises and stuff like that.
You wanted more of him.
I did. I wanted more of my dad, and I wasn't getting it.
Thomas, for you to hear Cassandra describe how much she needed you when she was a little girl, how does that make you feel?
It makes me feel like I made a major mistake. There's no way to go back and correct it.
Cassandra, I know you described in really very graphic detail what happened, and not only to the police, but also on the witness stand. How were you able to fabricate such a convincing story against your dad?
I had a friend at the time that had went through something like this, and she would talk to me about it.
What do you mean she went through something like this?
She had been molested and stuff by her stepdad.
By her stepfather?
Yeah.
Was she raped by her stepfather?
I can't remember.
But sexually abused?
Yeah. And
so she would talk to you about that?
Yeah, because we were pretty close.
At the hospital, you were examined, and a rape kit was used. And there was evidence of that you had been sexually active at just 11 years old. So did that, Thomas, did that contribute to the prosecution's case?
Yes, it did. Yeah, that was they had used that along with her testimony to find a conviction against me. But had they, I believe that had my attorney argued that evidence, because there was just what was referred to as a pinhole in the hymen. And honestly, had a full-grown man done something like that, it would be far more damage than that. And my lawyer refused to argue that. He refused to state that. And so I think that's what led to my conviction.
When you found out your dad was going to be going to prison for a very long time, how did you feel?
I felt guilty and ashamed, and I felt bad.
How were you able to endure the shame and the guilt?
I ran to drugs and alcohol, and just to hide, to try and bury the pain and cover what I had done.
Did you ever tell anyone this secret?
No. My mom took me for a walk on the beach, and I told her, I was like, Mom, I lied, and I don't know what to do. And she said, you know, she hugged me and she said, it's okay. And then the next day, apparently I told her that I took it all back again.
Other than that conversation, you never talked about this with anyone?
No.
What made you decide, Cassandra, to finally tell the truth?
The Lord. I had gotten clean up at the Mountain Ministries.
This was a rehabilitation?
A faith-based drug and alcohol treatment center.
And you talked to a counselor and confessed to a counselor there.
And I called the police and I let them know.
What did you say to the police?
I told them I lied and I wanted to recant. So.
Were you afraid that you could be charged with perjury or something that would have huge repercussions for you?
Yeah, I was definitely afraid of consequences. But that was kind of selfish to think like that. So.
What did it feel like for you to have this burden lifted off your shoulders after all these years?
Amazing. Freeing. I felt free.
What was it like for you two? You hadn't seen each other for years. I don't know. I think I would want to strangle my daughter if I were you. I hate to say that, but I think that it would be very hard for me to control myself, someone who had taken 9 years of my life away for something I never did.
No.
What was it like for you, Cassandra, to be with your dad?
Well, at first I was scared.
That he would strangle you, right?
Maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I was scared. I didn't really know for sure what he was thinking and what he was going to say or anything like that. And then I saw he took his hand out from behind his back and had a bouquet of flowers for me. So I melted right there, and it was awesome.
So clearly your faith for both of you really changed everything.
Without it, I wouldn't have been able to do this. You know, the Lord definitely gave me the strength to do the right thing. And, I mean, it's just amazing. I was so afraid of the outcome. And he kept telling me, don't be afraid. I'm with you. Don't be afraid. You know, you're doing the right thing. And that's what matters the most, to him. And there's probably so many people, innocent men in prison around the world, you know, for things that they never did. And there's probably a lot of women out there that want to do the right thing but don't know how. And the way is Jesus, you know. I wanted to make it right a long time ago, but I couldn't do it within myself. I didn't know how.
Do you think Cassandra should be punished for this in any way, Thomas?
I don't think she should. That's a loving dad speaking about his daughter, of course. Had it been a stranger, probably. You know, that the bitter, the anger, the resentment, and the lifestyle that I lived, I would probably say yes.
What is your relationship like today, the two of you?
We're working on it.
Well, that's an honest answer. We're going to talk to your sister, Marlena, your other daughter, when we come back. That's right after this.
Next, Cassandra's sister speaks out.
I always wanted to be with my dad. He missed my graduation. He missed my senior prom. The birth of my son. He missed a lot.
Have you forgiven her?
That's next.
After being hurt for about a year or so from my dad not being around, it built up as anger and bitterness towards him, and I just wanted him to just leave me alone. I wanted him out of my life. I made up a story, and I told the police that he had raped me when he never did.
Welcome back. Cassandra Kennedy was 11 years old when she made up a story about being raped by her father, Thomas, a lie that would send him to prison for 9 years. Her sister, Marlena, was just 13 years old at the time. Marlena, what was it like for you to see your younger sister do this? Did you believe her? Tell us about what you were thinking at the time.
I never believed it. Hearing my sister say that confused me. I couldn't see my dad doing that. I knew he wasn't capable of that.
When your sister came forward finally, Marlena, after 9 years, what was your reaction? And have you forgiven her?
For the most part, yes. I'm still getting to that step because I was daddy's girl. I loved my dad. I still love my dad, of course. But my dad was a big part of my life. I always wanted to be with my dad. And he missed my graduation. He missed my senior prom. The birth of my son. And sorry.
It's okay.
He missed a lot. And I was just happy that she came forth. I was still mad at her, but I was happy that she came forth and told the truth.
She took a lot away from you.
Not just me, I mean herself too. But me being as close to my dad as I was, it hurt. Him not being there. And I wanted him to be, and he couldn't. Not that he wouldn't, but he couldn't. And he missed a lot.
What would you say to your sister?
Thank you. Thank you for not hating me and trying to forgive me. It takes a lot to forgive someone. And I'm so sorry that I took your dad from you for all the important things.
You don't have to explain, I know. I know you're sorry, I can see.
And what would you say to your dad?
Thank you for being a good dad. And I am sorry for my wrong perspective as a child about you.
Thank you for your apology.
I'm glad you're here for me now.
And what is it like for you, Thomas, to see your daughters like this?
I'm extremely proud of them. And it feels good. It feels really good to have my family back. And I've got a beautiful grandson. It just feels real good.
You're a very impressive man.
Well, thank you.
And I think the way that you've dealt with the pretty untenable situation is very, very admirable. So thank you for coming in, Thomas, and telling us your story. Cassandra, it took a lot of courage for you to come and talk about this and admit your mistake. And Marlena, thank you. And I hope you'll all make up for lost time.
Yeah.
And we'll be right back.
Next,
They were saying that a terrible nightmare had occurred and they were blaming me.
she spent 11 years in prison, accused of killing a baby.
While you were in prison, did you ever give up hope?
That's next.
So like Thomas Kennedy, my next guest was living a nightmare, locked away for a crime she insisted she didn't commit. Audrey Edmunds is a Wisconsin mom who found herself in the most unlikely and terrifying of places, accused of murdering an infant in her care.
I spent just days shy of 11 years in prison.
Audrey, a pregnant mother of two, often babysat for neighborhood families.
I did some daycare and I just hung out with the kids. We played, we went to the park. We just had a lot of fun every day.
But on October 16th, 1995, everything changed. For Audrey, it was just another ordinary morning, waiting for the kids to arrive, including an infant, Natalie Beard.
Natalie was a beautiful 7-month-old infant that I had cared for 3 days a week. She was fussy, and she'd been fussy for her parents a lot, too. When her mom brought her in that morning, she was crying.
Natalie's mom, Cindy Beard, told Audrey the baby was irritable.
She'd been up twice the night before with an ear infection. She just continued to be fussy, and that's when I decided that I needed to just prop up the bottle and try to soothe her and get her to eat that way so I could get the other kids ready. Then I went back into the other side of the house and got my 2 daughters ready, and so we could all go walk in the strollers with other neighbor ladies up to the preschool. I went in to get her, and her head tilted and her eyes were shut, and I thought, she's gone to sleep.
Audrey picked her up, and that's when she noticed something was off.
Some formula came out of her nose, and that startled me, and I picked her up instantly and patted her on her back, trying to get her to respond, and it took me a few seconds to realize something is wrong. She's not crying, she's not responding. I called 911. They instructed me to start giving her CPR.
Help arrived and baby Natalie was airlifted to a hospital in Madison, Wisconsin. She would never regain consciousness and died later that evening.
They had said she was shaken violently and her head was slammed against something. I was just stunned. I couldn't believe that they thought that something had happened to this child when I knew in my heart nothing had happened to her.
Audrey Edmunds was charged with first-degree reckless homicide. During her trial, the prosecutor painted a picture of a pregnant and frustrated babysitter who was at her wit's end. And the forensic pathologist testified that Natalie's injuries were clear indications of shaken baby syndrome. While local headlines vilified her as a child killer, Audrey vehemently maintained her innocence.
Nothing was done in my care to hurt Natalie that day or any time.
But the jury sided with the prosecution, and Audrey Edmunds was found guilty. She was sentenced to 18 years in prison.
I went into shock. I grabbed my attorney's arm and I was just clenching then onto the chair that I was sitting in, thinking, what in the world is going to happen to my life now?
And Audrey Edmunds is with us today. Audrey, thank you for being here, first of all.
Thank you for having me.
You wondered what would happen to your life. What did happen?
It took a big change. It was very hard. I had never expected to be trying to raise my children, not living with them. And also, I was put into an environment, the prison environment was just so horrific, something you could never get used to. There was no way to prepare for it. And it wasn't at all a lifestyle which I would have ever imagined trying to have to endure and live in.
Take me back to the day that Natalie died. She was in your care. I know she was sort of a fussy baby. How long had you been babysitting her for?
I had just babysat her for about a month and a half, and she came 3 mornings a week to my house. And that Monday morning, she was fussy as she normally had been. And her mother had said that she'd been up twice during the night, and she had tried to feed her and console her. She had not taken her normal bottle that morning, and that's why I continued to try to feed her. Normally when she would come in and she would be fussy, I'd put her in the baby swing. But that morning, since it hadn't been normal for her, that she hadn't taken her bottle that morning, I continued to try to feed her, knowing that babies are hungry and sometimes the sucking would pacify them.
So you put her in another room, is that right?
That's correct.
Gave her a bottle. Why did you decide to put her in another room?
That was another issue with her. She didn't like to be around a lot of noise, and I wanted to protect her and have her in a quiet, comfortable place. That's why I chose the master bedroom, which was on the same level of the house.
So you propped a bottle. Tell me about that. Is that something you did on a regular basis?
No, it was not, and I'd seen other moms do it, and I figured that morning to just prop her up in her car seat and put some little, I put some burping rags underneath it and kind of lifted it up so it would be in her mouth, and I had hoped that she would suck on it and pacify.
So she could hold the bottle at the time.
She was not able to hold her bottle at that age.
So she was just
propped.
Sort of, propped. And so she could take the bottle when she needed to.
Right.
And then sort of reject it with her mouth when she was finished.
That's correct.
You walked into the room. What did you see, and when did you realize something was wrong?
What I saw was just Natalie there. The bottle had fell off from her. It was lying a little distance on the floor, and she made a little whimper noise, and her head tilted off and her eyes closed. And being a mom, we know that babies don't say, "I'm going to go to sleep now." I knew that she'd been very fussy for hours, and I thought, this poor baby is tired from crying so much. As I was lifting her out of her car seat and started to put her onto the floor with her jacket, I started putting the one arm in. She was not responding, and suddenly some formula drizzled out of her nose. And when that occurred, I got very concerned, and I picked her up and I started patting her on her back, expecting her to fuss and cry. And it took me a few seconds before instinct told me something is wrong with this baby. She's not responding.
So what did you do then?
I continued to hold her upright. I rushed through the house. I went out to my front yard, yelling and screaming for help. And one of my neighbor ladies that I was supposed to meet came down to meet me, and she asked me what was wrong, and I was yelling and screaming and telling her how baby Natalie was not responding. And she said, "You need to get in right now and call 911. And that's what I did.
When did you find out ultimately what had happened to Natalie later that night?
I found out that next day, early in the afternoon, very early afternoon.
What was your reaction?
I just broke down. I was devastated. I could not figure out what had happened and what had caused her to pass on. I had expected the ambulance people to help her, to have her start breathing correctly. I had gone to the hospital that day later in the afternoon. I had expected to see a baby in a bed, recuperating, being fine, and that did not happen.
Did you talk to her parents, Natalie's parents?
I talked to Cindy Beard, her mother, at the hospital. I was not able to talk to the father, didn't come visit with me then. And we talked for great length at the hospital. We hugged, we cried. She was very supportive and caring about what I'd been through that day.
But that was really the last time you ever spoke to her, wasn't it?
That was.
Did you feel at the time you were responsible somehow for Natalie's death?
I felt bad that she had choked in my care, but I didn't think that I had done anything to cause this problem.
When did you realize, Audrey, that you had gone from participating in a normal, typical investigation following this little girl's death to being a so-called person of interest? When did that click for you?
In January, we got a call. We had a civil attorney sitting in on our questioning with us, and in January, we received a telephone call from him stating that he had heard from the DA at Dane County and that they were going to charge me with the death of this baby.
And when you learned that?
I was devastated. I could not figure out what in the world was going on. I was 8 months pregnant. I could not understand why. I did not think anything bad had happened to this baby. I knew what had happened. I was there. And suddenly they were saying that a terrible nightmare had occurred, and they were blaming me.
Well, I know that you not only lost your freedom in prison, but you also lost your family. We're going to be talking about that when we come back.
On the next all-new
Katie.
Do you think you'll ever get married again?
Never.
It's Jane like you've never heard.
I went to LA to get a new knee, and I got a new lover.
How many people can say that, right?
Jane Fonda on the next all-new Katie.
Any wrongful conviction, unfortunately, can happen to anybody. And this is how quickly somebody's world can change into such a dramatic, horrible nightmare.
And we're talking with Audrey Edmunds, who was wrongfully convicted of murdering an infant she was babysitting. The prosecution claimed Audrey shook the baby violently, causing her death. It's known as shaken baby syndrome. Audrey served 11 years of an 18-year sentence before new medical evidence set her free. So, Audrey, I know 4 years into your sentence, you were up for parole. But in order to be granted parole, you had to admit wrongdoing and show remorse. That was something you refused to do. Why?
I knew in my heart what was true. I knew that this was a false accusation. I could not admit to their medical inaccuracies. And showing no remorse, I had already showed plenty of remorse, in my opinion. I took care of this baby. I cried for help. I consoled the parents. I went to the funeral. That was a far cry from a hit-and-run accident. And their definition of remorse was very vague and something that I could not do.
Your husband, though, wanted you to confess to the crime and really lie about what happened. Is that right?
We had talked about that because he felt that if I did that, I could get out, and he wanted me home with our children. And I knew in my heart I could not do that. It would be wrong. It would hurt the medical and scientific community, as that was growing in wrongful convictions against shaken baby already then.
Were you tempted, though, to say, you know, I just need to be with my girls, I need to be with my husband, I need my family intact, so if this is what it takes, this is what I'll do?
I thought about it, but it would be very, very, very hard, because I knew in my heart that that would just satisfy the wrongful prosecution against me, and I was determined that the truth and righteousness would truly prevail. I never thought it would take that long.
And what impact did that refusal have on your marriage? It was pretty devastating, wasn't it?
It was. That ended our marriage. He had tried as hard and as long as he could. When we said for better, for worse, we certainly didn't expect this extreme, and he had tried the best he could.
What about the girls? I know that they came to visit you, and it was a very long trip, and they initially came to see you, what, every weekend, right?
Yes, that's correct. Either their father brought them, or our friends, or my parents brought them a lot, too.
So after the divorce, how did that change the visitation by the girls?
It was very, very hard. It was a circumstance that was tough. It was hard for all of us. This was very, very hard for them.
Must have been a lot of tears at the end of those, at the beginning and the end of those visits.
Yes, it was, and it never got easier. It was something that none of us got used to.
The girls are how old today, Audrey?
18, 16, and 21. I have 2 in college and 1 in high school.
And what is your relation? They're beautiful girls. What is your relationship like? What is it like with them now?
We are close. I hear from them regularly. They stay with their dad when they come into town. The youngest lives full time with her dad. And there again, we go to sporting activities. They call me when I can help out or participate with things. And as any mom and dad know, with 3 young ladies, they're busy with their own activities and events. So I see them the most I can.
What about Natalie's parents? Have you ever heard anything from them? Did they object to your being released?
I have not heard from them. They were contacted by authorities when I was being released, and thankfully neither one of them had any objection to my release.
What would you say to them if you were able to talk to them today?
I want them to know the truth about Natalie's death. The medical and scientific evidence proves that she was not shaken. There was no skull fracture or bleeding around the brain to uphold the prosecution's horror stories that were painted in court.
Up next, we're going to talk about shaken baby syndrome and the medical evidence that ultimately set Audrey free. That's right after this.
Guests of Katie stay at the legendary Algonquin Hotel, a New York City landmark, steps away from Times Square and the Theater District in Midtown Manhattan.
That was the 911 call Audrey Edmunds made after she found the infant she was babysitting unresponsive. Audrey was wrongly convicted of murdering 7-month-old Natalie Beard and spent 11 years in prison. Also with us is Keith Finley, the Wisconsin Innocence Project attorney who helped Audrey win her freedom. Keith, nice to have you. Audrey, when you heard that the Innocence Project was interested in examining the evidence, it must have been, it felt like a gift.
It was a great gift. I was very, very thankful that I had something else to move on to fight for my freedom and truth and justice.
So, Keith, what happened in this case? Why was Audrey sentenced to 18 years in prison? I know you can't retry the whole case for us today, but what were some of the glaring mistakes that occurred during the course of her trial?
Well, this case really exemplifies what's sort of unique and interesting about all of these shaken baby syndrome prosecutions, is that it highlights the tension that you have when you have the meeting of law and science, in that these kinds of prosecutions are based almost entirely on scientific evidence. That is, there's no witness to any abuse, there's no history of abuse, there's no broken bones. All it is the doctors look inside the child's brain, they see certain markers there that they used to think were essentially diagnostic exclusively of shaken baby syndrome, and that's what convicted her. So it's all hypothesis about what it is that might cause these brain injuries. And what's really dramatic here is that's essentially all of the evidence, and it satisfies all of the legal elements for the crime. It tells us what happened, it tells us what state of mind was even involved, because they would suggest that it had to have been so violent that the person had to have known what they were doing. It had to be intentional or at least reckless. And it told us who did it, because they said it had to have happened immediately before the child collapsed. That's all unraveled since then medically, but that was what led to the conviction. Dr. Malika Marshall is our medical contributor. She also specializes in pediatrics. And Malika, I think most of us learned about this whole notion of shaken baby syndrome back, I guess it was in 1997, with Louise Woodward, the nanny up in Boston. And it seems the medical landscape has changed dramatically since then. Can you describe the old science versus the new science? Because I know there still is a rift in the medical community about shaken baby syndrome.
That's right, you've got it. I mean, back in the 1990s, it was a commonly held belief in the medical community that if a baby had 3 signs, what was referred to as a triad, that they had bleeding near the brain, they had bleeding at the back of the eye, or they had brain swelling, and there was no obvious evidence that this child had fallen on their head, that baby suffered from shaken baby syndrome. It was also a commonly held belief that if a baby developed symptoms from a brain injury, those symptoms would develop immediately after the injury. So it would implicate anybody who was taking care of that baby at the time the symptoms began as being the perpetrator. So you can imagine that if both of those criteria are met, that someone could be convicted of being guilty of shaken baby syndrome.
But how has the science changed? I mean, how is it viewed today in the medical community?
So there's no real consensus, but in the past 10 years, with improved brain scans, with more scientific evidence, with ongoing trials, there are many child abuse experts out there who say, yes, if a baby has those triads, there's a chance that that baby suffered from shaken baby, but there may be some other conditions that can actually cause that sort of clinical picture. We've also discovered that if a child suffers from a brain injury, they might develop symptoms immediately afterwards, but they may not, and they may appear perfectly normal for hours, sometimes up to 5 days after the injury. So you can't exactly time it anymore, which is why a lot of these cases are being re-examined.
So Keith, so now the science is saying a brain injury could, I guess, happen days before there's real evidence of it. So what do you think happened to this baby?
Well, it's really hard to know precisely what happened, and that's one of the things that's very difficult. The law wants answers, and sometimes we can't provide them all. It could have been trauma, but it could have been trauma that was even accidental, that occurred days before. It could have been the choking itself, which could have led to a cascading series of events within the brain that could have produced all of these signs and symptoms. It could have been the infection. The child also was known to have old or pre-existing blood in the brain, and that could have rebled, and so there were all kinds of things that could have caused the complication. implications here. But there was really nothing to suggest that this had to be shaking, or certainly that it had to be shaking while in Audrey's care.
How were you able to re-examine the case so Audrey would be released?
Well, we presented 6 medical experts, really top-notch people in the field, including the chief of pediatric neuroradiology at Stanford University Medical School. But one of the most important pieces of new evidence we had was that the chief medical examiner who did the autopsy on the child in this case, and who had opined at trial that this had to be shaking and that it almost certainly happened while the child was in Audrey's care, had some experiences after this where he had children who had in fact been in the hospital and had been lucid for 16, 17 hours before collapsing and showing the same kinds of signs. So he was courageous enough to come forward and say, you know, my testimony at trial, I can't stand by that anymore. That was mistaken.
Now, Audrey, you could have faced another trial. Is that right? Legally, that Audrey could have had a retrial? Is that right?
Yes. There's no statute of limitations on this kind of crime. The charges were dismissed without prejudice, meaning she could be recharged. But the prosecution made a decision not to retry her, and there's no reason to think they ever will.
Is this something that worries you, Audrey, that you could face another trial for this?
No. I don't think it will ever happen. The facts were so clear that this was not what happened to Natalie as they had charged me with, and I think it's just their way of putting it to rest.
And Audrey, you've written a book called It Happened to Audrey, It Could Happen to You, a terrifying journey from loving mom to accused baby killer. How has writing this book helped you?
I can finally tell my story. When I was convicted and when I was going through trial and even the new medical evidence hearings, you still feel like you really can't speak up about what you went through. I know it's a terrible thing. Nobody wins. The parents lost a baby. I lost years of my life with my children. All of our lives have changed, and it's good to finally tell the truth.
Well, Audrey Edmunds and Keith Finley, thank you both so much for telling your story. Keith, thank you so much for your insights, and Malika, thank you as well. And to read an excerpt of the book, It Happened to Audrey, you can go to katiecouric.com. We'll be right back. We would like to extend a huge thank you to both Audrey Edmunds and Thomas Kennedy, who endured so much and were very brave to come here and share their stories with us. If you'd like to learn more about the Innocence Project and other cases like these, go to our website, katiecouric.com. In the meantime, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.